Okay, great. So my talk is titled Magic Sprinkles, Adding Animation to a Jetpack Compose app. I'm Maia Grotepass. I'm an Android engineer at a company called Luno, and that's my Twitter handle. So I'm going to start this talk off with a demo. But before that, some small housekeeping. If you go to the channel, the question channel, there are two pinned links at the top. The one is the repo and the other is the slides. And the reason the repo is up there is because every single example that I've got in here, you'll see the merge request number at the bottom of the examples. And since all of the code won't fit on the slides, if you need to see the exact detailed working code and what was done, you can look at those merge requests and you'll recognize them because they'll have little sprinkles in front of the merge request comment. So without further ado, the demo. So if I want to add animations to an existing app, I needed an existing app. And my company hasn't yet started implementing Compose. So I wrote a little app. Luno is a place where you can store and buy crypto. And so the little app that I wrote is a simplified crypto exchange. And I thought it would be interesting if I added another element to it, and that's a Twitter element, because the cryptoverse has lots of Twitter influencers, and maybe you want to read the latest tweet by your latest influencer and then make your buy or selling decision based off that. And the other thing to mention is the UI part is written in a way that I would write production code for UI, but all of the data just lives in a view model and is faked in and fed into the UI. So let's just change the screen and I'll show you what that looks like. So I'm here on my emulator and I'm opening this. Okay, that is very interesting. It's not opening the app. Let's see if I can open the other one. Okay. Right, I can't open the app view there. Aha, so our keynote said I should have GIFs of the demo. I will have to show you the GIFs in the demo shortly. Oh, there we are. Ha, it just took its while. Okay, so this is the intro screen telling you what the app does. It changes to an order book. And you can see there's a tweet at the top. If you tap the tweet, it pretends to go onto the internet. Oh, this is super slow. It's not taking the clicks. And then you can buy or sell. So that's the interesting thing. Ah, there we are. It's the mouse. When you click on it and you choose buy or sell, you can be indecisive and choose buy or sell. And then add the amount that you want to buy, press the sell button. And now it will pretend to place the order on the order book and then track how much of your coin has been traded. And then when the order completes, gives you a status success. And if you press next, it takes you back to your order book. So this is my demo app. And this is the one that I want to add animations to. So I'm just going to leave that and I'll go here. So that's the demo. And I've told you about the merge requests. Okay, so now just taking a step back, thinking about animations. Now, for anything to be animated on a screen, something has to change over time, or in the case of screens, something has to change over the frames of the app. Now, the thing that changes, it could be position on a screen, it could be alpha, it could be color, size, or shape. So in this case here, you can see the shape is changing, and the color is changing, and the size is changing. The other thing to know about animation is that the shape of this graph is going to determine what the movement looks like. So that's just understanding animation and then trying to frame adding animations to the app onto that. So when I started looking at this, I had some questions in mind. So the first question I had was, where is the draw loop? Now, I know that's an imperative question and I should be declarative if I'm using Compose, but I still kind of wanted to understand where in the code would the screens get updated. Then the next question I had was, can I customize the animations? Do I have to calculate the interim values? I sincerely hope not. and how do I trigger an animation to start or stop. So now let's take another step back and just look at Compose. So I went on an investigation of how Compose works. Most of this audience knows how Compose works, but just as a refresher. So you have functions, which are composable functions. You build your UI. So these composable functions will emit UI, and you build your UI by nesting. So maybe you have a screen composable and you have the subcomponents of the screen composable as nested functions being called inside here. So the other thing to notice is that you can pass the state in. There's a concept where the state gets passed into the UI in Compose. And so the state, in my case, comes from my view model, and in some cases, some remember fields. The state gets passed in, and some of these lower level composables, they're effectively stateless. They get their state from outside. So what this looks like is you have a function, some other composable, the state gets passed in, you annotate with @composable. What this means, this @composable, is that the compiler will insert, there's a compiler plugin, and it will insert this composer into the composable. So each of these composables have access to this composer. And the composer has a data structure called a slot table. And inside that data structure, it knows the state. It knows how this tree is built and which pieces are dependent on which pieces of state. So it is able to recompose any of these composables if it deems necessary. And so already you can start getting an inkling. If the composer has this power and the state changes, then the thing that will make the loop run, the draw loop as it were, could be this composer. The other thing to know about the composer, through other method calls, there's a whole book about it, it actually has access to the frame redraws in the underlying operating system. So that's how that happens. So then, after I understood how Compose works, I went to the animation APIs and I started reading the animation API. So what I'm showing you now is my sketch note of my reading of the animation APIs. And what I did specifically was I tried to see if I could see things in the animation APIs that I could apply to my little app. So on a high level, there are some really high level useful things in the animation API. So what I'm going to show you here, this picture says, if you have no composable and you want to make a composable appear like a bunny in a magician show, or you want to make the bunny disappear again, the method to use is animated visibility. There are some parameters that you can pass that say, how does this bunny appear? Does it slide in? Does it just fade in? But that you can see in the detail of the API. If, however, you have two composables, so here the image is a heart card and a diamond card, and I want to swap between the two. So basically, this one disappears and this one appears. The composable to use is Crossfade. If I have a composable, but just the content changes. So here I've got a rose turning into a coin, but it could equally be like a text field and some text changing or some number somewhere changing. And it's just the content that's changing. You can use animated content to animate the changing of the content. And then last but not least of the high level ones, if I've got something like a text field that's a particular size, and then the state changes and this text field maybe changes size, it doesn't have to be only a text field, but this is the example that I've got here. Then there's a modifier that allows you to animate the content size. So this is the default things that you would want to do in your app, useful top-level API animation things to do. If, however, I dig in a little bit deeper, the next thing to see is if I've got some state change and there's only one parameter changing. In this case, the light is green, the light goes red. The circle is green, the circle goes red. So it's only the color that's changing. There's a family of methods called animate star, where star could be color. In this case, it's color, but this star could be DP or float or anything as state. So what this allows me to do is animate one property and keep it inside the state so that the composer knows about it. If I want to change more than one thing, maybe I want to change size and color, shape is a bit more complex, but more than one thing, I would set up a transition, update transition, and then I would hook up some children, say the size and the color, onto this update transition, and then update transition would manage all of these children as a state changes. So now I can see already I can change one property or I can change multiple properties. The other thing I might want to do is I want to run an animation continuously. So here the picture is a cloud and a raindrop, and this just can run continuously. So for that, you set up a transition as well, but it's an infinite transition, and it will trigger when the composable gets composed. And similarly, you can hook children onto it. Now, there are some things that you can use to control these things more, like this animated state is just using an animatable at the bottom, and you could animate to particular values. I'm not going to have any examples of that, but just for completeness sake, these are here. Or if you want more detailed control, you can set up an animation using a target-based animation, a side effect, and then get the frame and then get the value from the animation for more detailed control. So now if I'm going back to this graph that I had about the animation, so there's a particular curve here that says how the animation is going to run, and how would I control this curve? Say I wanted to go linearly in one direction to the next, or I wanted to have a particular custom graph like this. So the way to do this from the API is there's an interface called Animation Spec, and most of these animations will take an animation spec. And in fact, the default animation spec is a spring, and it's based on a mathematical equation, and you can set this different spring values to be stiff or not as stiff, or whatever the normal spring values that you can set. That's the default. The other thing you can have is a tween. Now, tween is just a shortening of between, and it's because it uses a calculation to work out between two values. And if you wanted it to be linear, you could set the easing so that it would be completely linear, or there are other easing possibilities with tween. The third way to do this is to use keyframes. So now how the keyframes work is you make a list of values that you want your animation to be at. So in this case, it's a float maybe, and you want these different values. And then you give it timestamps where these values need to be set. And then the interim values will be calculated by your animations. There are other ones. Okay, so there's infinite repeatable for repeatable animations, and there are some other ones as well, which I didn't need. So my first example now is the crossfade. So if you wanted to see the exact code, you could look at merge request number 4. And basically what we want to do here is I've got one composable, this tweet ticket, this tweet card, and then if you tap on it, then it should crossfade into the progress and then crossfade back. So I've set this animation to be quite slow. You can see it's quite a long time for the crossfade to happen. So let's quickly look at the code for that. So this part of the code, this is loading indicator, else tweet card. So this loading indicator is a composable that I have that has the loading indicator in, and the tweet card shows the tweet card. This code would have been in my app in any case, to switch between the two. To get a crossfade, all I need to do is wrap this code in crossfade, and then give that. There you can see it's the animation spec that says it's a tween, and this state is the state that it uses to trigger on. And here you can see, depending on here, the state is loading. The state will be either true or false, and it will just emit this. So you can see that it's actually very declarative. I don't have to do any interim calculations, and I can just wrap something easily in something like a crossfade. So my next animation now, I have a very indecisive customer that can't decide if they want to buy or sell. I don't want to flash this button. I want it to change color smoothly. So a thing to notice is that this is a state. There's a state. It's either in the buy state or it's the sell state. And there's only one parameter that I'm changing. I'm only changing the color of this button. So from the code perspective, I'm going to use animate color as state. Just take a sip of water. And I'm going to populate my button color using this by delegate animate color as state. So under the hood, what's going to happen is the state is going to be set inside the state of compose to be the one color, and then it will calculate the interim colors and change this button color as the color changes. And the logic that it uses to figure this out is if it's a buy, then it sets it to the buy color. And if it's a sell, then it sets it to the sell color. And here again, you notice the animation spec appearing. Again, a tween, but for 1 second only. Now, this button color will change the state. And then in the button itself, since the button itself is stateless, I'm just passing this color in and it will change and animate the color for the button. So now on my intro screen, what I wanted to do is I wanted to change the scale of these letters and I wanted to change the color. You can see it's that nasty little orange color and the black. So to notice here is that it's an infinite transition. The animation just runs. And there are two things that's changing. It's the color and the scale. So to do that, I'm using a remember infinite transition. So I'm setting up my infinite transition here. And then as children of this infinite transition, I ask it to track the size. And I'm animating a float, starting at 0.5, targeting 1.5. And the animation spec is an infinite repeatable with a tween, with linear easing. So this means it's going to go linearly in one direction and then return. And because the repeat mode is reverse, it will go one value and then come back, one value and then come back. So that's what's giving it that pulsing size change. The color has exactly the same setup as this, with the difference being that the initial value, target value of the color is the black and the orange, and then I'm using animate color instead of animate float. So these two parameters are going to be managed by the remember infinite transition. And then again, my text, all I need to do is pass into a stateless composable the color and the size, and it will animate the text. Now, if I click on the tab, I want the tab indicator. So this is a fancy tab indicator that draws a rectangle around the tab. I want the tab indicator to change. Again, what you can see here is it's a state thing. So it's either on tab 0 or it's on tab 1. And also the things that I want to change is I want to change the start position of this box, the end position of the box, and the color. So a caveat I have to say, this code was grabbed from this material catalog sample repo. It's a really useful little app because it's got good samples of all the material components, and it's got a lot of animation examples as well. So it's really useful to see how to use either the animations or the material components. So the code for this, I set up the update transition. The state that it's reacting on is this tab index. So it was tab index 0 or tab index 1. So when that tab index changes, it will trigger the transitions. I set up onto this transition, the children here is DP, animate DP. There's the start indicator, the end indicator, and the color. Now, where am I getting these values from? There's an array of tab positions that knows for each of the indices what the left and right value of the tab would be. And then the transition will just animate the values, the float values in between for the start and the end and the color. And then again, fancy indicator is just that the indicator that will draw the box, but it is stateless. And so it just takes the color, the start, and it gets its width like that. And then that will, because the state is updating, the stateless composable will be redrawn. Now a little intermission. I want to jump onto navigation. So now I'm not inside the animation APIs anymore. This is just another animation possibility. So there is a library, an experimental library, Accompanist. People might have come across Accompanist, and there's navigation animation. And you'll see the merge requests are number 1 in the merge and number 11. And so I use the Accompanist navigation animation API to animate my navigation. So let's see what I wanted to achieve. What I wanted was like a linear progression. So old screens, an existing screen would flow out towards the left and new screens would come in from the right. So that's the basic animation I want. So you can see they're sliding in and out from the left and the right, unless you went back, in which case it goes in the other direction. So that gives the user a kind of a progression from one screen to the next with the slide animations. So I built my navigation inside the app using the Jetpack Compose navigation, and it has Nav Host and Nav Controller. So I had that navigation already set up. And so all I needed to do was I added the accompanist libraries, and then how this works is before I had, remember, Nav Controller, but the accompanist animated navigation just has an animated version. So I literally swapped in this animated version, and instead of Nav Host, there's an animated Nav Host. And the minute you use these new composables, you now get some more parameters to set. So I've got an enter transition I can now set, which the normal Nav Host didn't have, and an exit transition. And what this does is it sets up a default animation for each of the screens coming in and out. I've got two examples here. I've got slide into container here. So this is an enter transition. So you can see it says sliding towards start. So start being on this side. So it means new screens will slide in from this side. And the exit transition here, I'm using a slide out horizontally as another example of this. Its target offset is negative. So the exit would mean it's going towards negative because 0 is at the top left corner. So this means all of my screens will be sliding in and out like this. There's also some more parameters for pop and for enter and exit for pop, which is for when you're popping the stack. And then what you can do after that, I haven't shown the code here, but it's in the merge requests. For particular screens that need to animate differently to this, you can override and then just override for particular screens by checking what their initial and what the routes are that they're moving to, they're navigating to, and then set up the animations for that. So now on my completed order screen, as the order was being filled, I had this total. And what I have here is the numbers are changing, and I want to animate how these numbers are changing. And for that, I'm using animated content. So just a reminder here, the top of the screen, the coordinate system is 0, 0 at the top here. So what I'm showing you here is that you can set up these transition specs. I'm setting this up in a separate value here. And this animated content scope is a scope that gives me things that are pertinent to animated content. And what it does here is that you can check, it has a value, the initial value and the target value, initial state and the target state, and you can check what the initial state and the target state is, and then depending on whether the one is bigger than the other. So if this were the numbers, the initial state might be 0, the target state might be 1, in which case it will come through the slide. The else case. The thing to know here is there's this infix operator with, and with, this is an enter transition, and this is an exit transition. So it's saying, what should I do for the thing that's coming in, and what should I do for the thing that's going out? So the thing that's coming in slides in vertically. Initial offset, that's the height for the full height. So it slides in and it fades in, and the slide out takes an initial offset of the negative of the height. You can read up about the detail of this, but basically what it does is it'll just slide up or slide down depending on if the value is positive, bigger or smaller than the existing value. So now I want to show an example of using state and keyframes. So my success text looks like this, rainbow, very 90s website rainbow text. It loops indefinitely, so it's not based on a particular state change. But it does have multiple colors that it's looping through. So what I have here is I have an array, rainbow, that has these colors in it, or whatever colors you choose to have inside it. And because I'm looping continuously, I'm using Remember Infinite Transition. And I calculate the interval. I have somehow the duration. I want the animation to run over a particular duration, and I calculate the interval between each color change like this. And so I'm animating the color. Since it's only a color that's changing, I only have to set this animate color. But because it's a Remember Infinite Transition, I still use a transition. I set the initial value to 0, the 0th one, which would be red in this case, and the target one to be the last one, purple. Now, if I didn't set these keyframes, if I just had another tween or something else in here, it would just change from red to purple and skip all the in-between colors inside here. So how to make it change all the different colors on the inside? The animation spec here is a keyframes animation spec. And this is literally just looping through the rainbow and figuring out at what time interval should it be at the next color. And what this will do is it will smoothly change the color from one to the next using keyframes like this. And then again, just pass the color to the text to make the text change color. Now I have a custom element. It's like a pie chart, and as the trade goes through, it must fill in the pie chart. So what the code looks like for that, it's a float that's being animated. So I get a percentage in from my view model, and I want the percentage to change slowly as a float as time changes. So I calculate the current percentage like that. And then the little pie chart is just simply a canvas, and I can draw a circle for the outside of it. And then the arc just takes this percentage, which is changed as a state in the state, and draw the arc to fill in the circle. So start angle minus 90. That means it starts at the top because 90 is at 3 o'clock. And then the current percentage will just fill in the detail of the circle. Oops. Going backwards. Okay. So now this is the last one of my examples. What I wanted was when my order came through successfully, it would show confetti in the background. And how I built this is I used a modifier, and I took inspiration from animations of particle systems. So there are lots of example particle systems that you can find on the internet. And this is just a simple particle system. So each of these pieces of confetti, or a confetto is a single of a confetti, they just have a random position, and they have a vector and a speed, and then it just changes over time. But what I wanted was, I wanted to be able to apply this confetti to any composable. So I wanted it to be a modifier. So let's just quickly run through this. So this is the most code of all of the examples. I created a data class, a confetto, for the singular confetti piece. It has a position, a vector. It has some other parameters as well, but I've omitted those for briefness. And this is just an ordinary data class. It's got two salient methods. It's got a create one, which will make one with random values. And it's got a next one, which has some calculations about what the next position should be. So it'll update the position for the confetti each time you call next. Then I have a confetti state, and it just contains the list of all these confetto inside it. And the important method here is that it's got a next one or an update method. And this literally just runs through the confetti and calls each of their methods to update each of the particles. And then the piece that's interesting, I made a new modifier, confetti. And this composed, what it does is it gives you a block that's a composable block where you can remember state, and each of these will be instantiated for each of the places where you add these modifiers. And what I'm doing inside here is I'm remembering the state, and I'm using a side effect. So what launched effect does is I'm keying it on is visible. So what launched effect does is it will launch a coroutine. And then it will run the code that's inside here, inside the coroutine. And what it does as well is so the is visible flag is how you control whether the confetti is visible or not. And if this changes, say it was false, and now it changes to true, it will cancel any previous coroutines that it had before, and it will make a new coroutine and run the code again. And so what it'll do here, it's got a loop that runs on this flag, on this isVisible flag, and it calls the suspend function a wait frame. So a wait frame will suspend until the next frame is ready and give you the nanoseconds that has passed since the last time it was here. And then I use this time inside my Confetti State by making all the particles jump to their next position. So every single frame, it'll update all the particles. And then if isVisible becomes false again, it will stop the previous coroutine, basically stopping all of this, and then just fall all the way through because the while will come out of the other side. Okay, so this is more of the same one. So the previous code and the previous slide came in over here. And now modifiers have this method, DrawBehind, and that allows you to draw things behind whatever the composable is that this is applied to. And this basically just checks to see if the confetti is visible, and if it is visible, then get the state and loop through the confettis, and then get their color and get maybe their size and their position and their offset, and draws them just by drawing in a normal draw scope, drawing a circle. This could be a rectangle or a circle, depending. I mean, I'm just showing the circle example. So after seeing all of that, now I can give you the final demo of what this looks like, hopefully. Yes. Oh no, this is so slow. Let's see. Okay. I'm not going to be able to show you that demo. Maybe my other demo works. So then what I did was, after I got all of this working, I took some of the code and I just pasted it into a Jetpack for desktop or Compose for desktop app. And basically, I could get it going with very little change. So let's see, that works. And also that works. Okay, I'm going to try doing this demo one more time. It's not demoing. Okay, never mind. Right, so now back to my questions. The one question I had was, where is the draw loop? And the composer and the way that it interacts with the underlying operating system and the way that it recomposes and uses state, that's actually how the draw loop runs. Can I customize the animations? I can. There's lots of ways to customize, and the animation spec is the first thing that comes to mind. Do I have to calculate the interim values? No, unless I really want to, but mostly no. And there are lots of words that you can look up in the API to figure out how that works. How do I trigger an animation? It's basically the state that changes, and that causes everything to recompose, and that makes the UI draw the animations. So just a summary of my impressions. I really liked that it was super declarative, that I could just say I wanted this animation, I wanted a crossfade and wrap code with that. It was really easy to add. There were really good common cases for simple things that you would normally do, like the crossfade and animated content. The composables had really good defaults. So if I didn't set any of the animation spec or anything, it would work out of the box. It might not be exactly what I want, but certainly I could get something going. And then it was easy to tweak as well by just adding different animation specs. And bearing all of this in mind, I think if I wrote another app, I would probably add the animations in from the beginning, because even if the animations aren't perfect, it's easy then to demonstrate the animations that are in place to a designer who could then fix them and make them more subtle and make them better. And then the tweaking of the animations would be really easy to do. So I wouldn't, if I did this again, I probably wouldn't write the app and then try and add the animations afterwards. I would probably add the animations as I went along. And then my thank you slide is just my code reviewers. I had two colleagues, Charles and Andre, code reviewing, and Mark Allison. And again, the link to the Git repo. And with that, I am open for questions.
Thank you so much. That was an amazing presentation. I know I now want to add Confetti to all of the apps that I make ever. And that was really helpful for learning more about how I can use animations in my app, which I know I'm definitely going to be digging into soon. For those watching, if you have any questions, please join the Magic Sprinkles Adding Animations to Your App with Jetpack Compose Slack channel. Whether you have questions now or you think of them later on, as I tend to always do. We'll give it a couple moments for any questions to come in. I know in the channel there's plenty of love for your examples. For our first question, what is your advice to create animations and reuse them in different places?
Okay, so the basic API calls like the Crossfade and the, say, animated content, those you can just put them in where you want. I think what makes the animations different would be the animation specs. So I think the parameters that you set them up with, you could extract those and have certain like values for animation specs that you can reuse to make. So I would reuse the setting up of it and the transitions. So you could set up the transitions and reuse the transitions in that way. The other things are very much state dependent. So if you've got a state inside a composable, you would need to still access the state. So that's how I would reuse them.
Nice. Thank you. Did animations adversely affect your espresso or UI tests?
I think you can test animations, but these are this is a toy app, so I haven't been digging into the testability of them. I hope they are testable, but I think there was some piece of it in the documentations that they are. So I can't directly speak to that question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem. And how was performance of your Compose animations versus animations with regular layouts, if you know that?
Oh, I haven't been doing a lot of animations with regular layouts. It somehow felt like building apps. There was never any time to put the animations in because the customers always wanted new things, so that we would just be moving along, which is one of the reasons why I think if I'm changing over to Compose, it'll be great to just build in the animations from the beginning anyway, right? So the animations are there and then the designers will see them and say, okay, they're not that pretty or not that ugly. So again, I can't answer your question except to say that I'm going to build in the animations from the start if I start building Compose.
Yeah, that's great. And it seems a lot easier to build them in from the start with Compose. All right. Well, thank you again very much for sharing your presentation with us.